What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PT Coffee Cast brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and unfortunately, not alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. He is out doing some important things. I tend to take a step back from the important things because Will has way more wisdom than I do, obviously, with the length of that beard. He has that on me. So it'll just be me today, but I am excited. We do have an interview. We haven't spoke with this guest in a long time, but she's probably the most reoccurring guest on the PT Coffee Cast. I think definitely holds that title. We have Emma Jack on the podcast, also known as Press Play Physio on Instagram, and we're super excited to have her back for our year-ish cup of coffee. Emma, what's going on?
I'm so excited to be here. And yes, we're like a little bit overdue, but I love what an annual get together this is. So I love that people are joining with us as we just catch up.
Yeah, how has your day been so far?
Day has been great. Day has been full. So Mondays are typically my treating days. But I've had like not a typical Monday so far. So I've treated a little, I've had some meetings. Yeah, it's been good.
Nice. Yeah. And I feel like before we recorded, I was like, oh, there's always something different going on with Emma every time we chat. And I think like since the last time we talked, there's been definitely been some changes with you, like moving your business to being in your house. I know you're getting married like soon, right? So I think
Yeah,
that's also
countdown's
coming up.
on.
Yeah. So there's a lot of moving parts going on.
Yeah, I think last time we spoke was probably around April, May of 2022. And I think at that point, I was discussing how I was sort of scaling down my physical therapy practice. I moved from a brick and mortar location and having other clinicians working with me to moving my practice home. I now just treat one day a week, so typically on Mondays. And then I'm spending the rest of my week coaching and working with other healthcare professionals, helping them not only in business, but in life. And it is, without a doubt, I can now say a year and a bit in, the best move I could have made for myself in this season.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's like, it's kind of something I wanted to touch on with you today because like I think it takes a lot of awareness and courage to like take that step back or not even take a step back but like change the direction of what you're doing because like I know obviously having gotten to know you over the years like the kind of changes in your career and then when you were opening like the clinic how much of a passion project that was and a big thing that you thought was going to be like your move and going to fill you up the way that you imagined. And then obviously that changed. So I would love to maybe dive into that process of like how you were becoming aware that like you needed to change. And then once you identified that, like how how was actually making the change itself? Because I think those are two separate things, like identifying it and then actually doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And it was two very different things, mentally, emotionally as well. So yeah, I mean, I started my clinic back in 2019. And that was really born out of, a pretty intense period of burnout for me. And knowing that, okay, if I want to stay in PT and I want to remain a physical therapist, how does it need to look for me? And what do I need to create in order to make this feel really good? And so that's exactly what I created. My brick and mortar was such a reflection of how I wanted to show up for other people and how I could treat and the model that felt good for me. And it was really out of sharing what I was doing and sharing the model that people started to reach out and say, "Oh my gosh, I love what you've created. You look like you are absolutely thriving. How do I do that too?" And so very organically, I was hopping on calls with people and chatting with them about, a broad range of topics between like starting a clinic to burnout and imposter syndrome and all of these things. And I realized, in that process, as much as I loved being a PT, I adored that work, working with people and helping them get to know their patterns and, habits that were serving them or not serving them, and being that accountability and just that sounding board. And so, over the course of a couple years, I was still running my clinic, but then I always found, on nights or weekends when I had the opportunity to be coaching, I was like, oh, I finally get to do my thing now.
Mhm.
And it sort of became like physio was like a means to an end so that I could coach. And when I started feeling that more and more over time. Because realistically, when I was, I don't know, 13 and decided I wanted to be a physio, I didn't realize coaching was a career or even an option. And so I followed the path that felt good for me until I found something that felt even better. And so once I realized that I loved coaching so much, I just worked, and it's been a slow process, and I still am treating, but I worked to the point where I could, in a very safe way, decrease my physio so I could scale up the coaching side. And I think, the world needs more people doing exactly what they love. And so it wasn't serving the world, me showing up as a PT full time when I knew I actually really loved coaching. And so it was very hard to make that change. I had built up and poured so much time and energy into building this clinic and having this space. But I remember, like, so vividly, my lease was up in May of 2022, and I remember in February sitting actually in this room and just envisioning myself signing the lease and signing another 5-year lease on my brick and mortar clinic. And I just remember the pit I felt in my stomach thinking about that. And I'm so glad I allowed that to have a voice, because logically it didn't make sense. Right?
Right.
If you look at the financials, the clinic was booked and busy, it was very successful, it was making me good money. And to step away from that didn't make sense for a lot of reasons, but it made the most sense for the reason I felt in my body. It wasn't it, because I had found something even better. And I'm so glad I followed that. And it was hard. I often say, like, decisions made in the name of alignment are often the hardest ones,
Mm. Yeah.
because having to tell the women that worked with me, having to tell my client, that was an excruciating couple months. It was so hard. Now, being on the other side of it, I would do it again 10 times over, for how it feels. But it doesn't mean because something, is ultimately the right choice, that it feels good along the way.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think like even just the outside perception of like you stepping away from this clinic that you built too can also be like people can start getting thoughts around like, oh, like, oh, she's failed, she can't do it, blah blah, like just all
Yeah.
those things. And those external things can also influence a lot of people's decision making, like even if they know it's not something that they are aligned with, right? So I think like that whole process takes, like I said, like so much courage and awareness and like making those decisions to do. And one thing I've always appreciated about you, and I'm sure this came across like really well to the people that follow you, is just like you show up pretty authentically as you on your page. So like people definitely, know when you're making these decisions and you're talking about them, that it's like you've thought about them and you're trying to like make the best decision for yourself and your career. And I think that's very very apparent, and I think people really appreciate that in a world that sometimes isn't as like authentic as it could be, or people get this idea of like, oh, this person's super successful when really they're not, and like vice versa. So I think that that's cool.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. I think, one of the most disheartening things about that whole process was when I did sort of announce, on social media that I was scaling back and making these changes, was how many people messaged me in my DMs saying, "Ah, I wish I could do the same." They
Mm-hmm.
were in positions and roles and maybe had built a life that they weren't in love with, the thought that maybe, they thought that maybe they would be, and they were feeling really stuck in this. And I just want to remind people, like, we are never stuck anywhere. Is it easy? No, but you don't have to be stuck. And again, to that notion of, we need more people doing what absolutely lights them up and feels right for them, and not what society tells us should feel good.
Yeah. And one thing I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. But what I would like assume just from like an outside perspective is like, I know you really think about like your values and who you are and your standards and how you want to show up as a clinician and as a person. And I think you definitely mold those two things together when I look at your brand and just get in knowing you and all of that stuff. And when you made the decision to leave like the clinic and move into more coaching, it's just like you transferring your vision, your values, your standards, and all of those things to another like vessel to deliver that. And that's what I really think is cool and something that we try to encourage a lot of the new grads and just clinicians that we talk to or that have been going through our mentorship is this idea of really taking the time to identify those and like identifying them early on in your career so that you have like what we call like their north star that's going to guide them as they move through their career and that they have something to compare to when they're making decisions as to like what they want to do. So whether it be like go to this clinic and work here or start their own business or go into coaching, like they're always like comparing like is this holding my standards, my values, my mission, my vision, all these things, and am I able to utilize whatever direction I'm going to go to be able to show up that way. And I think that that's like super important to overcoming or managing imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I think that time spent learning about yourself and figuring out what you stand for and what's a heck yes and what's a heck no, like that foundation, you can go anywhere with that. When you know who you are and what your yeses are and what your non-negotiables are, that, like you said, it's your north star, it's your lighthouse, it's whatever, sort of flagpole, whatever it is. um that gave me the confidence to know, oh, I can also thrive over here, right? It's not an external circumstance that you're looking for to make you feel something. It's like, I know who I am, and that inner knowing will take you so far. And so it's like not the like fun sexy work and you don't get a certificate of completion or another credential after your name, but there is no more important work than that.
Yeah, totally. Um, I would be curious, like when you, well, actually, before that, I think one thing that's really cool, I'm glad that like there's people like you who are leading the charge in this way, and just showing clinicians and younger students that there's different like um, avenues that they can go to have success in this career and still have an influence on the healthcare space is super important to me. And I think it's super important to our profession because I've talked to so many people that are like really great people and really good fits for this profession, and they end up leaving it because of like maybe they don't find their passion or whatever. And I think like to be able to have multiple avenues in which you can still have influence on the healthcare space is like so key, and it doesn't have to necessarily be like just working in a clinic or just owning your own clinic. I think is like super important.
Yeah, and I think these days, now more than ever, there's so many ways to utilize our skill sets. And PT's like your best first career. There's so many skills that you learn: communication, relating, empathy, problem solving, critical thinking. Like, we don't realize how many sort of sub skills we are gaining by doing the work that we do. And it serves us so well, like, in and out of the profession. And you're right, it doesn't have to look like, I think a part of my story too is sort of me for a long time following that sort of classic trajectory. Graduate, work for somebody else as you build your credentials, get your credentials, open your own clinic, hire staff. And I had this moment where I just kind of like woke up from that and I was like, wait, did I even actually want this? Or did I just think this was the best next thing to do because this is what everybody else has done? And how much does this actually use my zone of genius?
Hmm.
And that's another thing I would encourage people to look at. Like, what parts of this job are you so good at? and where can we bring those out more? How can we make you thrive more using those skill sets?
Totally. Yeah. And I know like one thing that you do obviously with your coaching is like trying to allow people to thrive like in their profession and kind of start their own thing and help them like create that. I'd be curious to hear like what maybe some of the more common like struggles or yeah, probably more of the common struggles that you see some of your clients that you're working with deal with when they're trying to like carve their own path.
Yeah, I think something that I see so commonly, and I think this is a byproduct of, the type of people that go into PT, is they are growth oriented and want to see themselves growing as well. And there is a deep discomfort in the feeling of stagnation over the long term. I think there's absolutely seasons that we need to not be growing. We can't always be growing. But most people come to me because they just are like, what's next? Like, I can't just do this for the next 20, 25 years. This doesn't feel like enough. And um, especially in private practice, there aren't too many. I mean, I think there's a ton of ways you can grow in private practice, but there aren't too many that are shown to us, right? It's either, you could become a clinical manager or you can open your own clinic, but like the growth opportunities can feel or can seem really limiting. And I think it's so important that people realize you can take this career so many different ways, and there's so many different options, but you have to do it. And you have to really want it and be able to put in the work and do the things that other people just aren't willing to do. I look at you guys and like how consistent you've stayed with podcasting, how consistent you've stayed with your messaging. And that's just something most people aren't willing to do, right? Most podcasts get to episode 7 and they pack it in because nobody's listening. And I think it's those kinds of innate things that will help you long term. And so it's figuring out, something I do with all of my clients is helping them understand themselves and what's going to trip them up. What are some of their natural tendencies and default patterns that are going to trip them up, and what are the things that are so special about them that are going to make them thrive? And how do we work with both of those in order to get them where they want to go?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think those are good things to explore because, sometimes we might not actually want what we think we want when we find out what is required to do that. And that's cool. Like
Exactly.
there's nothing
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. And like there's different directions that you can go. And I find oftentimes, even just in my own life and then with some of the people that we work with, it's like once they start exploring that and realizing like, oh, I don't actually want this, but what I do want is this, it opens up that doorway for them to like step in and start to thrive in that. And there's just so much opportunity now to do those things, whether it be on your own or seek out other people that are doing that maybe you could work for them or with them or whatever that looks like. That I think it's a really important thing to explore, especially in this profession when like I think a lot of people will just be like, oh yeah, I want to open my own practice because like that's just what you do.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to unpack there.
A lot, a lot, a lot. And it's like, okay, what about the end result do you like? Right? And can that happen another way?
Mhm.
Right? Because it's so easy to not look at, and that's where, I do my best, and I think you guys do a great job too, to show some of the behind the scenes and what it actually is like. Because if you're just looking outward and being like, oh, owning my own business looks fun, it's like you're not showing 11:30 at night when you're trying to balance the books. you know like there are
Yeah.
you have to really understand the whole breadth of what an endeavor is going to look like before you can make an educated choice. And it's so important to sit with yourself and slow down a little to make sure, not that you can't change down the road, but to make sure, okay, yeah, I'm on board with this, and that's where knowing your values is important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's okay to change as you move through your career. Like I look at myself now, and I started out like obviously always had like this education, like with the social media and the podcast, like as something that I really enjoy doing. And but like treating was like the top of the list for me, and like it really fired me up, and like I loved working with people and being able to like help them get to their goals and all that. And it's still definitely something that fills me up. But like over the last couple of years now that I've stepped into like owning my own business, and we're still doing like a lot of the podcast and the mentorship, and I've really found myself not being being filled up more by
Mhm.
doing things like the mentorship, and even just being like a coach to our team here from like a development side for the clinicians, but also just like also trying to figure out how we can keep growing the business to fulfill like on our mission and our vision. And that's something that I get more fulfillment and enjoyment out than actually like treating my like. And I never
Yeah.
really thought that I would get to that point, but now that I'm like seeing it, it's like, oh, this is cool. Like this is just like the next kind of pathway that I go down. And I'm just grateful that, that I've had the opportunity to be able to do that, but also created the opportunity as well. I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay to like identify that and have it change. And I think it's important that you let that happen if it's happening, kind of similar to like what you did with making that shift.
Yeah, and like how great that if that's something that feels good and feels natural and aligned for you, that you're able to put yourself in that role to help so many other people, right? I often think like it's such a service to know where like versus your zone of competence, like you are a phenomenal PT, but like your zone of genius is like even more niche, just like, oh, actually teaching and educating other PTs is where I really thrive. And being able to play in that realm is going to serve so many more people long term because now you're not just, you know, PT to client, you're PT to PT to so many more clients that are going to feel the impact of your work. And what a gift.
Yeah, it's super cool. And I think it's like it fulfills other people's journey of wanting to find a role that fills them up. Because like one thing that I always saw in the profession was like, there was not really a place that I wanted to go and work at, like this kind of perfect opportunity for myself. So big reason why we started what we are doing was to try and like create that for ourselves. And I think there was a lot of other clinicians that we were talking to and knew that wanted the same opportunity, but didn't really have nowhere to go. So a big part of what I get to do is now like create those opportunities for clinicians that actually want to go and practice. And that's like, not that I don't want to practice, but that actually like fires them up and fulfills them to be a clinician. Cause there are people who just
Yeah,
want to treat and get as much fulfillment out of that as I do doing all the other stuff that I'm doing.
exactly.
And so to be able to provide that for other people to like step into is also like super cool for me.
Yeah. And I think that's just it. We're not all meant to do and operate in the same way. You know, I adore and love that there are people who get so much energy and fulfillment from treating in an 8 hour day. And we need those people, and so it's also great though for that person who treats the 8 hours a day and is like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Why does this not feel good? To know like that's okay too. Like we need people doing other things, and there's so many other options. And and again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we just need more people doing what lights them up.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just creates more opportunity to like, I look at what we're doing with the mentorship, and like even just some of the stuff we do within the movement, where like we do some consulting with different businesses that allow our clinicians to like step into a little bit of a different role within the physio realm. It's like the more people that are innovating and creating new pathways can then allow other people to step into those roles as well. And then like you don't necessarily have to treat 8 hours a day. Like maybe your clinic
Yeah.
offers you the opportunity to treat 4 hours a day, and then you can be part of like their mentorship program that helps mentor younger physios, that they can also be compensated for that, and they can kind of give you a little bit more of a balance in your career. And that's something that we're trying to do with our business. And I think like other people and millennials want those opportunities as they're coming up.
Yeah.
So I like that people are innovating. I think it brings a lot more opportunity to the space.
So important. I think, to your point, especially these days, in order to keep people engaged and excited about this profession, I think there needs to be more than just the option of, you know, come in, see patients, and leave. I think it is that diversity that's going to bring out the best product.
One thing, I mean, obviously like social media marketing, branding, like all those things are things that are important, to business. But I would say you've definitely been like in that realm for a while. And one thing that we talk about in our mentorship is like this idea of like um, filling your caseload with clients that like fill you up. And I know like that's something that you kind of pursue, obviously, with your business, as well as like the clients that you see now, especially because
Yeah.
it's a lot more streamlined. um, I'd be curious to hear like how that has grown, how your growth in that idea has gone over the last couple of years, because I think it can be hard to turn people away or say no to people or opportunities, when you feel like you have to say yes, kind of, because you're like, how can I say no to these people? So I'd love to
Yeah.
hear how that's like changed for you over the years.
Oh, it's changed dramatically, and I would say that that's probably been one of my biggest growth edges. And I know I'm not alone in this. When people talk about the idea of niching, I think in the very same breath, people are also thinking, but what if I don't have enough people? And it can be so easy to go into scarcity mindset around that. And I get it because I did the exact same thing. I think to me, can be a bit of a rite of passage to be able to work to the point that you can say no to people and you can be more choosy. And I do think we have to experience a lot of different things just to get an idea of this, not that, right? And so I would say it's been a continual honing process of realizing what works for me and what doesn't. And I think as I get to know myself more, I get a better idea. And every encounter, every experience teaches you something. And I think it just helps refine a little bit more, a little bit deeper. And yeah, I think it's okay and normal if the idea of niching feels scary to you, if it feels like you're going to disappoint people. I think that's very normal, and we should normalize it. I know I got into the PT profession to help people. And so I had a story about, well, if I say no to this person, I'm not helping them.
Mm.
But I've really been able to work with that and realize that actually, if I'm not feeling like they're a good fit, that's a disservice to them. And there is somebody out there to see this person who, will get such better treatment and is a better fit. Like we're not meant to serve everyone. So I think it's really important that as you niche, you also grow your network to know, okay, if I'm going to say no to this person, where am I sending them where I think it's going to be a heck yes? Because I still don't feel right about just flat out, being like, sorry, no, I'm fully booked. You can't see me. Good luck. I really do. It's serving to me to know that I'm helping them land somewhere that feels really good for them.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think, along the way, you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna take that person who you think's a yes and they end up being a no, and you learn something from that. And sometimes, you miss out on epic people too, and really good experiences. But I think that's all a part of the process.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I feel like it's definitely an evolution, and like it takes time to refine it. And like early on in your career or like in your business or whatever it is, like you're definitely going to probably take on more people, and then like maybe you need to, or if they're not like these perfect fits, then it's probably not going to start out that way. But what you start to realize is like in the long run, working with those people that might not be good fits or not fire you up or you not fire them up is not going to be serving anyone in the long run.
Yeah.
So like you definitely learn to identify that. And I think, it kind of comes back to that idea of like knowing your values and who you are, and kind of that like guiding framework of yourself as a clinician, is super important to identify, because then you can like carry that with you. And I think the biggest struggle that I've seen with some new grads and stuff is like when they work within a clinic that's not theirs. So like it's easier for
Mm.
us because like we both own our own businesses. We have a lot more control of how we
Yeah.
market. And you know, if we say no to someone, then it's like that's fine. Like that's on us. But like some other obviously scenarios are different. And I thought a lot about it, and I'm like, I think even with that being said, like it's still so important for you as an individual clinician within a business to like really hone in on like who you are and what you stand for and who you want to work with and what's your avatar. And like you can go out and seek those people on your own, because even within a clinic, you are still like an individual entity for the most part. And like there's no way that like your clinic is going to be disappointed in the fact that you're going out and like looking for those people that fill you up and bringing them to you. And then those people are now seeking you out and you're having good outcomes with them and they're happy with their experience. It's like no clinic, I don't think, is going to be upset with that. And then it's going to fill your caseload with people that really, fire you up. And then it might less of the people that don't necessarily fire you up. And you do have control over that, I think, even within
Yeah.
another clinic. So I think it's important regardless, and can be controlled by the clinician or the individual.
Yeah. Again, it's about being willing to do the things that not everybody's willing to do. Putting yourself out there, doing your own marketing, asking for reviews and referrals from people that are a good fit. I think all of that stuff, I, it's a bit, and I want to be careful how I say this, but it's a bit of a cop out to say I don't have control.
Mm-hmm.
And to be sort of helpless in that. I think there is an element of control, and until you've done the things, over and over and over, I don't think you can say, "Oh, I can't do that." There's a way.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think that it's challenging. It doesn't make it's not like it's not
Oh yeah,
easy. It's really hard to do, but I would agree. I think that like it is in your control. And one thing that we've really put a lot of time and effort into with like mentoring younger clinicians and new grads and stuff is like to provide them with the frameworks on how to do that. Because I think a lot of it doesn't come from like, people don't want to do it, they just don't necessarily have a guiding
yeah,
framework for how to do it. And so like we really have tried to like provide that for people, so that then it's on them. Like now you have a framework
yeah,
that we know has had success. We know other people have done this. It's like take this and make it your own, and now you're in control of it. And then if obviously you're not choosing to do those things, then yeah, like that's just the way that you've chosen to go, and that's fine. But I think like trying to share more of the how with people is super important.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. It's something that unfortunately is just at least wasn't talked about in school for me, as sort of the more business side, and knowing that you are really your brand and how to get yourself out there. But there are so many tools. Like I always remind myself, even like the internet is free. We can find out this information. There are people like you guys who like are ready and willing and wanting to help people, and so important to utilize those resources.
Yeah, for sure. All right, to transition our way out of this interview, because you and I could
Yeah.
chat for literally days. um, I would love to hear like is there anything that you're super excited about right now, like that heck yes that you're doing or that's coming down the pipeline or anything
Mm.
like that?
A few things. So definitely my intention sort of in this post-COVID era was to get people more together in rooms. I May of 2020, I had a venue booked. I was going to host my first in-person event for PTs, and I was so pumped for it. But you all know how that went. It got canceled. Everything's been on Zoom ever since. And so I just hosted, when was that? End of June, my first event in Vancouver. I have another event which actually just sold out today in Toronto in October. And I just have such an intention of bringing people together in rooms, meeting each other, feeling each other's energy, sharing, what lights them up. And so, yeah, I think more retreats, more in-person events is really what I'm excited about right now. I still love Zoom. Don't get me wrong. All of my coaching is still virtual, but really feeling this push to bring more people together and create more true community.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's needed for sure, in
Mhm.
general, but like definitely,
Yes,
definitely,
societal level and within the profession.
yeah, definitely like post COVID, I think it's great, and it's something that like I think like I've rewired the way that I'm kind of thinking about where we go with things because like a lot of what we do nowadays is like consume things super fast and like okay, I'm going to buy this program and I'm just going to follow it along on like the videos and then I'm
Right.
going to go. But what I've learned from our mentorship is like that nuanced conversation amongst different people with different perspectives and different mindsets and on different trajectories is like so important to the
Yeah.
growth. And I think a lot of us are craving that. And I think we need to go back to having more of those offerings versus like, okay, how can I go through this like 6 week program on a video module like as fast as I can?
Yeah, I think that creates more stress, truthfully, because you can consume it, but you can't integrate it. And I think the integration process needs to be so thoughtful and does need to go slow. I think we're fooling ourselves to think that this stuff, these 8-week fixes or like, 6-week turnaround, whatever it is. I think slowing things down honors the true nature of the task.
Totally. All right, Emma, that's all I got for you. I would love for you to leave where like people can find you on Instagram, your website, if they want to work with you, all that stuff.
Yeah, so I'm probably most active on Instagram. My handle's Press Play Physio. Send me a DM because I like to be in my DMs the most. I, at this stage in my career, don't always post a ton, but I am in my DMs every single day. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. My website is emmajack.com. And I always love, like I said, I just love connecting with other people. So even if you are not looking for coaching or interested in coaching, I just love meeting and chatting with people. So if you want to book a call with me so we can actually connect and not just sort of follow each other, please do that. You can do that through my website.
Love it. Emma, thanks so much for your time. As always, it's a pleasure connecting on a yearly basis to have you on this podcast. And we're going to keep that title of the
Yes.
number one reoccurring guest. I don't think anyone's going to catch you now. But thank you as always, like super grateful for everything you've done for me and Will and what we're doing. You've been a huge like, mentor and friend and someone who's kind of leading the way in terms of innovating. So I'm always very appreciative of your time and your insights.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to have a front row seat to your journey and yeah, to see, what you've created. I just can't imagine where we'll be a year from now.
I'll see you then.
Sounds good.